the Final Fantasy VII Remake, a project that was a long time coming. A legend in the making, even before the original game launched due to how fast technology was moving. I want to talk about the history of this remake, at least up to the release of Part 1. I hope you'll stay with me to the end, and maybe you'll learn something new about this 20-year-long journey that led to the release of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII was released in 1997, a product of many creatives coming together from Square, putting their ideas in a basket and making them work wonderfully together. Masato Kato, for example, is an unsung hero in the development of Final Fantasy VII. He is part of why Tifa's the main heroine, and the livestream sequence is as beautiful as it is. Nojima created Zack into development so that the false memory mystery, Air's past lover, and the mystery of Sephiroth would work so well. Nomura worked on the underlying scenario alongside Hironobu Sakaguchi, storyboarding, doing the concept of the limit break, and our wonderful character designs. Kitase directed the game and contributed to making Sephiroth like Jaws. Yusuke Naoda would unify the visuals to fit the vision alongside Ken Kanzaki. Those are just the names of some of the few people who contributed to this great game. Many would contribute to this masterpiece in ways you would never know. After the release though, this dream team would go in many different directions. Things such as different visions, wanting to create multiple Final Fantasies faster, mess-ups, and company politics made it so that many would fracture with each other or leave the company. While they all worked on other games, there was one thing they couldn't let go of. No matter what they worked on, Final Fantasy VII would influence them. Some would even have unfulfilled desires from the development of Final Fantasy VII. When Hironobu Sakaguchi was there as the leader of Final Fantasy, there was a company-wide rule. Final Fantasy games were not allowed sequels or related things in the form of games. You could do books, but you cannot do games. Thus, some of the ideas that weren't put in Final Fantasy VII had to be put to the wayside. However, in the following years, Square would try to merge with its biggest rival in Japan, Enix. While at first, the merger would look good to Enix, they would eventually back out after it was looking dire, due to the failure of the movie Spirits Within and the delay of Final Fantasy X putting Square in the red on the market. Hisashi Suzuki, the current president, would be replaced and Sakaguchi would step down from his corporate seat. To make the numbers look better, they would announce Final Fantasy XII, and remasters for the PS1 trilogy, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, and Final Fantasy IX for the PS2 to try and save face. It wouldn't help much, but it did make them look a little better. The real change would happen when Yoichi Wada would come in and find ways to make the company more profitable. One of these ways was a new polymorphic content initiative. The fruits of this labor would come in the form of Final Fantasy X too, because of how cheap it was to make. It brought the company into a very good position, and Enix thought it would be a good time to merge with them. So in April 2003, as soon as the fiscal year started, Square Enix was created. Some devs would not enjoy this, thus they would leave the company. Hironobu Sakaguchi is the biggest example. Others saw this as an opportunity to explore games in a way similar to Final Fantasy X, like Yoshinori Kitase. Going back in time, during the development of Final Fantasy VII, Nomura and Nojima were exploring ideas with Zack and looking for ways to incorporate him into Final Fantasy VII in more ways than they initially did. A lot of these ideas would go unused, and they thought that because of the no game rule, they thought they wouldn't have any meaningful way to explore these ideas. Wada would be the key they needed to explore these ideas. He allowed Kitase to explore the Final Fantasy VII Vault so they can milk it and keep fans engaged for the franchise as it was their biggest IP at the time. Kitase would then greenlight a Final Fantasy VII short movie, Advent Children, a Vincent game, Dirge of Cerberus, mobile game, For Crisis, and a Zack Fair game, Crisis Core. While all handled by different teams, they were all seen under the vision of Yoshinori Kitase. This initiative would surprise many, including the man Kitase got to direct the short film, Tetsuya Nomura. After the success of Final Fantasy VIII, Nomura would go on to direct Kingdom Hearts, thus making a name for himself in Square Enix and the gaming industry at large. He and the crew would announce Final Fantasy VII Advent Children at Tokyo Game Show 2003, and in 2004 he would tell an interviewer that there was even more Final Fantasy VII stuff on the way. He was surprised because he thought there would only be a movie and a mobile game. He mentioned that the conclusion Kitase set up for the compilation was going to be very surprising and no one would expect it. The world of Final Fantasy VII was slowly expanding beyond what anyone could have dreamed of. Depending on who you asked, the project was good or bad. But it doesn't matter because they did what Wada wanted to do in the end, make money and keep fans engaged. It would also help Nomura solidify his style that he would continue to do after Final Fantasy VIII. You see, the style he used in Final Fantasy VII was him doing what someone else wanted to do. For example, Sakaguchi. However, he would go on record saying that Final Fantasy VIII was the style that he truly likes to do. Kingdom Hearts leans away from this a little bit, but when you look at it, you still think Tetsuya Nomura. After the release of Advent Children Complete in 2009, everyone thought that the Final Fantasy VII compilation was over. Fabula Nova Crystallis, Dissidia, Kingdom Hearts, etc. were being made, so there was no room for it. But behind the scenes, during the 25th anniversary of the Final Fantasy franchise, Kitase was thinking about doing something. He would have a meeting with Shinji Hashimoto and Nomura to talk about the plan that he set in motion when he started the compilation. While they would push back the idea of a remake publicly on multiple occasions, especially after it was requested because of a 2006 PS3 tech demo, they would be setting the stage for it. They couldn't do it now, as they had other obligations. Nomura over the years would tell people that he hears their requests and he would like to do it, but he can't at the time. While they were making games they wanted to surpass Final Fantasy VII, the desire would be looking at the big conclusion of the universe that they had been building since the start of the compilation. Versus 13, internally canned and turned to Final Fantasy 15, will be taking up most of their time alongside overseeing the conclusion to the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy and Type 0. When 15 was revealed, 15 was the next big project that would have all hands on deck after the conclusion of Final Fantasy 13, alongside Nomura finally starting on Kingdom Hearts 3. However, during that time, disaster struck. There's two stories to this. Tabata says that in 2012, Final Fantasy Versus 13 was going to be scrapped. Wada wanted to see if he could save it, while Nomura has gone on record saying that Wada told him that he believed in it so much that it could surpass Final Fantasy VII, and that he wanted to continue. Shinji Hashimoto would also go on record saying that he wanted this too. In the end, it doesn't really matter who's right, but both can't be, so I guess I'll leave it up to the viewer. Nomura would be removed from Final Fantasy 15 in 2013, not too long after the reveal at E3. The reason? New president Yosuke Matsuda. Matsuda saw how everything was going down and looking under Wada. Final Fantasy 13 was selling less and less with each entry, and they were not following through with their new technology initiative. Matsuda had three things he wanted to do to try and correct course. More Western games, get Final Fantasy 15 out fast, and get out these dream games. Kingdom Hearts 3, and Final Fantasy VII Remake. Because Square Enix at the time had all hands on deck with other projects, and Matsuda wanted them to remake FF7, it was outsourced to a trusted partner, the developers of the G-Bike minigame mobile game, CyberConnect 2. CyberConnect 2 would work on G-Bike Final Fantasy VII, and it was an experiment stated by Kitase to see if they could work on Final Fantasy VII.
Until now, whenever we talked with Nomura about a project that would require outsourcing, his first choice was always CyberConnect 2.
During the interview, he was once again asked about the possibility of a remake, and he had this to say.
Who knows? Mr. Matsuyama is making the foundation, and after the path has been paved, we might think about making it. At least that's what could happen. In terms of the quality level and consumer response, it may all depend on G-Bike. We're looking forward to the results.
In retrospect, I have no idea how he got away with saying that. Literally a year before the announcement. But anyway, it makes sense why Nomura wanted to work with CyberConnect 2. Since Remake was going to be more than one game, their expertise on a multiple-part RPG series would be good. The animation and model quality were top-notch and probably some of the best in the industry while having fast output. A perfect recipe for what the remake was aiming for. The initial pitch presentation would have Kitase reveal to Nomura that he would be directing. Nomura was surprised since he thought Kitase would be directing it just like the original. Kitase loves surprising Nomura, I've started to notice. During pre-production, they knew that it would end up being a monumental task. To recreate the world from 1997, it wouldn't be as simple as making a 3D version of the pre-rendered background. Not only would the fans want the stylized realism the franchise has come to know, Shinji Hashimoto thought that he could improve on how Advent Children looked, in terms of characters and location designs. Your mileage may vary, but to me, it depends on the day. I don't know which one looks better, sometimes Remake, sometimes Advent Children, but I digress. A full recreation with a big scope was the only option. Nomura knew that once it started, it would take a while, and they'd want it to be over as soon as they started. Even Wada has said this in 2010. Around the release of Final Fantasy 13 in the West, he was asked about the remake again. He would say that he would love to do it, but he can't right now as it would require all hands on deck from Square Enix. The Square Enix side of the team would be people who worked on the original and those who didn't. Yoshinori Kitase as producer, Kazuhiko Nojima as scenario, Tetsuya Nomura on director and story concept, Roberto Ferrari as sub-character creator, Masashi Hamauzu, and Mitsuto Suzuki on music. For CyberConnect 2 side, not many people are known. Only confirmed staff were Hiroshi Matsuyama, and during an interview with MinMax, Anai Akihiro would be asked if he worked on the Final Fantasy VII Remake during the press release of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. He would answer by zipping his lips, which would imply that he did, so I'm going to assume that he was also on there. With the team assembled, they would go into full production around 2014. While they chugged away at the remake, Square Enix fans will be hit in 2014 with a remaster announced at the PlayStation Experience in December by Dotemu. The way it was announced had many people thinking that it was going to be a remake. Nomura would later say that wasn't the intent, but I'ma be real, man, the way you guys announce stuff is funny sometimes, so I feel like it was. During 2014 and 2015, we'll get updates on Kingdom Hearts 3, Final Fantasy 15, smaller titles like Star Ocean 5, and whatever else Square Enix had in their lineup. Then, E3 2015 came around, and before the Sony event that night, Silicon Era would leak that Final Fantasy VII Remake would be announced later that day. Nobody believed it, because multiple times through the years, they would say things like, we need to surpass the original first. It would take a long time to make, it would require everyone at Square Enix, etc, etc. Then, the night hit. After the reveal of World of Final Fantasy, which is a fantastic game, by the way, please play it. If you have not played it before, please play it. It's on all platforms you can think of. Please, please. The theater went dark. A green trail that looked like the live stream showed up on screen. And then the trailer played.
Long ago, we looked upon a foreboding sky. The memory of the star that brightened all present in our hearts. In its wake came an age of silence. Yet with each time, those encountered were not forgotten. That someday we would see them again. Perhaps it was no more than wishful thinking. But after the long calm, there are now the beginnings of a stir. The reunion at hand may bring joy, it may bring fear, but let us embrace whatever it brings. For there,
This trailer lit the world on fire. People were losing their minds. They had stated that they announced it so they could sell PS4s and widen the user base before release. In hindsight, I think maybe they should have done it 2 years later in 2017, since it would have taken 3 years later for the game to release. And also, that's the year it was brought in-house. Later that year in December, they would reveal gameplay for the first time. It was the entire bombing mission, fully voiced and looking really stellar to many. In interviews that same night, they would reveal multiple things. They had used the name Remake to make it known that Final Fantasy VII was back and that it wasn't anything else, not a Gaiden or anything like that. They wanted to use another subtitle, but they didn't think it would be necessary because it would confuse people. Another thing that they announced was that because of the nature of the remake, it would be in multiple parts.
To tell the truth, the remake has been in the works for quite some time now.
As we continue to develop the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, we'd planned to continue it with a remake, but with only me working on it at the time and being busy with other projects, we silently shelved it.
The 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy got me thinking about Final Fantasies and my own future, wondering if we were to actually remake Final Fantasy VII and see it through to the end, when would we need to start to make it in time? In an unrelated event, while Shinji Hashimoto, Nomura, and I were talking, I asked them about resuming production. Hashimoto had previously said he wanted to improve the original's graphics with those from Advent Children, and after some talks, we started working. The reason we didn't do the remake until now is that the technology wasn't quite there for a full-scale remake of FF7. Reproducing the original's feeling of density in the HD era would require a volume of content that would not fit in a single game.
If you want to capture it in one work, you have to cut various places and make it a digest of Final Fantasy VII. That doesn't make sense. For example, this time we can explore various places in Midgar, which we couldn't go to in the original because of the increased scale. I want to put such things in and draw it densely. Of course, there will be parts that'll be cut from the original version for various reasons. If you add something unique to this work, and do it with more detail, the overall volume is expected to increase in the end. Everyone's worried about the schedule, but we want you to play it as soon as possible.
They would emphasize that the combat was not going to be completely action-based, despite the trailer being shown. Nomura would say it's not all laid out yet, and that he is moving with the team in the direction that he wants for it, while apologizing to fans that it wouldn't be the exact same as the original. Kitase would say there will be story changes, and because it was him, alongside Nomura and Nojima, who worked on the original, they felt that nothing was off the table. But they would find a way to balance it out, since Final Fantasy VII is a sacred title in and out of the company. While they want to do stuff that was new, they didn't want to alienate the original players. Nomura would say that for the story he wanted to write, he wanted to do it in a way that would appeal to both old and new fans, like I said before. However, since it had been 20 years since the release, he felt that people had a bunch of different views on the characters that didn't line up with what was originally in the game, because people probably weren't replaying Final Fantasy VII all the time. Nojima felt this too, and wanted to make it so that everything, including the compilation, would be under one unified vision for the narrative. Like Kingdom Hearts 3, due to Luminous Engine not being complete because it was being developed alongside Final Fantasy 15, they would choose Unreal Engine 4 as the engine to build the Final Fantasy VII Remake, to make sure there were no hitches in the development process. Now, I say that because I want to say something that a lot of people probably have their own mind made up about. So, between 2015 and 2017, as we know, CyberConnect 2 worked on the game. However, we don't know what happened for them to bring the game in-house. We don't have a full story. There was a leak on Reddit, but it got deleted not too long after, and I don't want to say it's gospel, like many other people have done in the past. I do not think that what CyberConnect did was so poorly done that they had scrapped everything they worked on. I do know that Nomura said he was unsatisfied by the trailers and some of the in-game stuff quality-wise from CyberConnect 2. However, it is clear to me that the foundation they laid is still there. Kingdom Hearts 2 and the Dissidia duologies, battle planner Mitsunori Takahashi was on that build with Nomura working on Final Fantasy VII Remake's battle system. He's in the credits for the prototype alongside others who worked for CyberConnect 2. One person even came over from CyberConnect 2 to the main team at Square Enix to work on the game and finish it. His name was Mizuki Tsunoda. So I don't believe that it was some kind of beef or that it was a shit show or fire happened and everything's on fire and they gotta delete everything when it was brought in-house for CyberConnect 2. My assumption is that they finally have the people they need to work on the game and they want to be Square Enix quality, and they decided that it would be better to bring it in-house while CyberConnect 2 would work on their own things like Naruto, Demon Slayer, etc, etc. On the 20th anniversary of the original game, we wouldn't have much, but we would get some kind of good news. There would be key art for the anniversary showing Cloud and Sephiroth in Midgar. Kitase would say that they don't have the exact amount of games down, but it was still multiple parts, and Mitsunori Takahashi, alongside Nomura, had finally completed the vision of the battle system. Nomura would go to Magic France 2017 and reveal that Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy VII Remake were about 3 years away, give or take. He would also have screenshots of both to accompany it, even though he wasn't allowed to bring a trailer. A couple months later, it would be said that Final Fantasy VII Remake had finally moved in-house. Several people would be added to the team. Not only that, Nomura would get 2 co-directors to help lighten the load, since he was working on these 2 big projects, Kingdom Hearts 3, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and some other small projects, Motomu Toriyama and Naoki Hamaguchi. Naoki Hamaguchi worked at Square Enix starting on Final Fantasy XII as a character animator. He would then be one of the programmers for the Crystal Tools engine and one of the main programmers on the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy of games. His work would have him promoted to project lead on Mobius Final Fantasy, a high-quality Final Fantasy mobile game that was a retelling of Final Fantasy I with crossovers and a new tale. I didn't play much, but from what I did, it was very stylish and the combat was crunchy. His work on it would allow him to move on up position to the co-director of the Final Fantasy VII Remake because Mobius was already being worked on by Business Division 1. So it made sense to have your programming guy be the development day-to-day guy, while Nomura works on Kingdom Hearts 3, this, and some other projects. Hamaguchi, during a Mobius Final Fantasy stream, would have this to say. The information is already available online, but I've taken charge of the development side of Final Fantasy VII Remake. As for the whole story, it's a sensitive topic, but until now, development was moving forward with an external corporation. But the company has decided to shift to an internal setup, including mass production and quality. because we want to control everything, including quality, on a stable schedule. Motomu Toriyama is someone who doesn't need an introduction, but I'm gonna talk about him anyway. Motomu Toriyama has been working at Square Enix since the original Final Fantasy VII. He was a planner and uncredited writer alongside Jun Akiyama, and they both wrote a lot of the NPCs that you see in the game. One of the stories he proposed for Final Fantasy VII was a group who were given a purpose by gods, and they needed to take their own fate back from them and put it into their own hands. I guess you can guess where that story went to. If you don't, it's Final Fantasy XIII. He would go on to work on most projects Kitase was on. He would write scenarios and supervise work. His work would allow him to be promoted to director on Final Fantasy X-2 and the director of the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. When Final Fantasy VII Remake was brought in-house, he would join Hamaguchi as co-director. His role would be on dialogue and story. He would also contribute to vocal songs alongside Nojima. He would make sure to go after specifically NPC dialogue and tackle the characters he wrote originally and find a new way to expand on them. They would put out job listings to try and get as many new people on the game as they could. For a while there would be no substantial news. Famitsu would ask on multiple occasions during the press cycle of Kingdom Hearts 3 for an update, but he would say things like, "Yeah, it's going smoothly. You'll see it soon. We're trying to figure out when's the next appropriate time to show the game." More people would come over and join during the silent years. Big names such as Teruki Endo would come over from Capcom's Monster Hunter team to be the battle director. Takano Miyake would come over with Hamaguchi and Toriyama and work on the environmental stuff as the environmental director. Ichiro Yamaguchi would be lighting director. Masaki Kanzo would join as character model director. Yoshiyuki Soma would be animation director, and Shintaro Takai would be graphics and effects director. A lot of them doing the same roles they did back in 1997. This would be a collaborative effort of monumental proportions. Different devs from different parts of the company would come and contribute things outside of their main objectives. People who weren't working on certain parts of the game would also come over and help. If you worked on Dragon Quest XI-S and Kingdom Hearts 3, once those games were winding down, people would come over to help the Final Fantasy VII Remake team with Unreal Engine 4 issues. After a 2-year-long calm, there would be beginnings of a stir. May 7, 2019, Sony announced a state of play. In the speculation thread on Reset Era, ZongEX would post a picture of Hashimoto laughing. Many realized that he might be hinting at the long-awaited re-reveal of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And indeed, it was that. On May 9th, 2019, during the state of play, this trailer would drop.
Halt! Hands up!
Have fun.
I'm here for you, to help take the load off your shoulders.
So, what's our next move, boss?
That's easy enough.
Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Here. This is for you.
A flower?
Can you bear to see the planet suffer? Cloud.
Final Fantasy VII Remake was back. The first trailer wouldn't have much, but it would be a lot to chew on. The new story elements that Kitase promised were there, and you will get a taste of that by Sephiroth showing up earlier than he should be. E3 came around and revealed Tifa for the first time, along with the new ghostly creatures that follow Cloud. Kitase would reveal that a skeleton crew has already been put onto the second part of the remake, and they were sending more people over as the remake was wrapping up. They would reveal that the game would release in March of 2020. He also stated that despite this being a remake, the series would be treated on the same level as a mainline Final Fantasy, and that you should consider it one. They would explain the new hybrid battle system of real-time attacks and ATB. During this, Nomura would explain that he told Kitase that it wouldn't be right to go full action, similar to 2018's God of War, as that would betray the old fans. But he also wanted it to be action because Dissidia was pretty popular. So, he and Mitsunori Takahashi would come together to create this compromise. The battle system that they had talked about building before had finally come to fruition in front of everyone's eyes. Once Teruki Endo joined, he and his crew would be the ones to be able to execute this vision perfectly. Tokyo Game Show would showcase the Shinra crew, materia, summons, and more locations in Midgar. A 7-minute commercial would air on Japanese TV in November, trying to pull out the nostalgia strings and get people ready for the demo that would release next month. Everything was looking good, everyone was excited, but as 2020 was rolling around, the world would be put to a stop. The pandemic had hit. It would affect many things, including the game's physical shipments and halting the final pieces of development. Because of this, the game would have to be delayed a month so they would be able to do final adjustments with working from home conditions and to get physical shipments out the door with the slowed down production. To hold people over, they would release a lot more news a lot frequently, such as the theme song, which would be composed by Uematsu, sung by Yosh, and written by Nojima. We would get character bios and an inside development series that would focus on different aspects of the game. April 5th would hit, and the review embargo would expire. Many reviewers loved the game. However, they took issue with some story changes and pacing in comparison to the original Midgar, while praising aspects such as characters and the combat. On its release, it would be a game that was loved by many, but also caused some anger and also some confusion. The new elements did what they intended to do. It was also able to deliver the feeling of nostalgia so many yearned for. It was a big success for Square, selling 3.5 million in 3 days, and lifetime sales it would go on to sell 7 million plus. It would get a next-gen version with DLC starring Yuffie Kisaragi in an earlier portion than she was supposed to be compared to the original game. With the sequel and port to the Nintendo Switch 2 and Xbox families, the remake series will soon reach its conclusion. It may bring joy, it may bring fear, but let us embrace whatever it brings. And that is the development history, or just the history in general, of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I might do one for Rebirth, but there's not as much information out there that I can as meticulously look into as the Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1. I assume Part 3 will be the same, so I don't know if I'll do them, but there is another Final Fantasy development video coming out soon, and I want to branch out to other franchises and do more of these, and maybe make it my main thing, since I do love video game history and the development of certain video games, and I think it's a really fun thing to do and talk about. So I had a lot of fun making this, and I hope you had a lot of fun listening to it. So I hope you guys have a great day, and anticipate the next development history video, which will be the 10th anniversary video for Final Fantasy 15, alongside a review for Final Fantasy 15. So I hope you guys have a great day, and peace from Quasi Games, everybody.